Hello, everyone. Welcome to Change and Thrive. I'm your host, Dr. Wendy Heckelman, founder and CEO of WLH Consulting and Learning Solutions. Thank you for tuning in. Please be sure to subscribe and select the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss an episode. We know that many organizations are going through, in some cases, large fundamental transformations, and in other cases, smaller shifts in how they do business. As organizational strategies shift, it is critical that leaders understand those changes and the impact on their teams and individuals. Oftentimes, these strategic shifts require new capabilities and skills. In today's episode, I'm going to share with you some tips and best practices to coach direct reports through transition. I am pleased to be joined here today with Loretta Cate, who is a trusted member of the WLH team and leads our leadership development practice area. Loretta, welcome.
Thank you, Wendy. I'm excited to be a part of today's podcast. I certainly believe that leading through change, or leading through transition, as we call it, is the new normal.
Absolutely. And I think before we start to talk about transition coaching, it's really important that we level set the difference between change and transition. Change is something that is done to you. It's an event, it's tangible and concrete. In organizations, change can represent announcements related to strategic shifts, which we're seeing a lot of, mergers and acquisitions, restructuring, new leadership, or enterprise-wide initiatives. Change has also been the impact of COVID on organizations. However, transition is about how you respond to change. It is deeply personal, intangible, and different for everyone who experiences the event. Loretta, we know when organizations are going through large-scale change, there are often implications to individual roles and expectations. Can you take a moment, please, and define transition coaching and why it is so critical as part of any organization's change initiative?
I would love to, Wendy. You know, transition coaching is unique, and it's a very powerful method that helps leaders guide and support their direct reports during times of change or transition. So keep in mind that it's very different from performance coaching, developmental, or even career coaching, because it's specific to their unique transition challenge. Whether that's personal or professional, the individual faces these challenges throughout the process, so they can change at any given time. So with that being said, leaders have to check in often with each of their direct reports to identify what at that moment for them is their greatest transition challenge, and together work to identify mutually agreed upon plans to solve for that challenge. And by staying connected throughout the transition, leaders are able to keep their direct reports focused on what they have to gain by overcoming these transition challenges, as opposed to focusing on what they fear they're going to lose.
Thank you so much. That's a terrific way to kind of characterize transition coaching, because we know that many leaders oftentimes think when we say transition coaching, they could fall in the trap of performance coaching or development coaching, which we know this is not. Transition coaching is targeted to help an individual get from point A to point B in the new reality. We have a process that we use at WLH that's tried and true when equipping leaders to be able to coach through transition. It would be helpful, Loretta, if you could paint the picture and share our approach.
Absolutely. And this approach works if you do it. Okay. So there's 6 steps. And I always say the first step is the most important. It's what I call the great do-over. It's where you establish or you renew a working relationship with each of your direct reports. You know, we all know that the lack of a coaching relationship is the #1 reason people leave an organization. A good coaching relationship is the #1 reason they stay. So regardless of whether this person's new to you or you've worked with them for years, you want to take the time to design a new coaching alliance around how you're going to work together moving forward. Very powerful step. Step two is to, like we've been talking about, you want to take the time to identify with them what their current transition challenge is, so that you can check in with them often, make sure that if it changes, you're aware of it and you can plan for that. Step three is when you identify this transition challenge, you want to ask them what they think their strengths are that will help them overcome it, or what strengths they bring to the table that are going to ensure their future success. Same with what developmental needs or knowledge and skill gaps they have. What are those things that need to be filled in for them to be able to be not only strong in the future within the organization, but also navigate through transition challenges as they arise. Step four is then set transition goals and timelines that they can proactively monitor and be accountable for. Step five is develop an individual transition plan. And these transition plans obviously are to overcome the challenges, fill in the learning or skill gaps, and finally make the time to check in where you evaluate and you recalibrate as needed on these individual transition plans. It's just like an execution plan. You can come up with one, but if you don't follow up to make sure that what you put in place is working, then you may never achieve the desired results you want.
Loretta, you really described not only the process beautifully, but the key point is that it needs to be followed and inspected and calibrated, and it needs to be a mutual process. Sometimes those transition challenges are very big, where an individual may need to acquire a whole new skill set. And in some cases, it's smaller. One of the things that we know is it takes time and a level of commitment. So, Loretta, when you think about the best that we've seen, how does transition coaching work best between a manager and his or her employee?
Well, the manager has to make it a priority. That's the biggest issue that I find happening. They have to block time out on the calendar so that they can schedule at least 2 face-to-face meetings during the transition. And you want to meet, if you can't meet face-to-face, that's fine. We've got great things like FaceTime and Zoom meetings, but the important thing is you want to be able to see them so that you can assess what they're thinking and what they're feeling about the transition. That's critical if you're going to understand their perspective about the change and also what they perceive as their unique challenges at any given time. And when you schedule that meeting, Wendy, you want to make sure that you're telling them the purpose of that call, or the purpose of that session, so that you don't catch them off guard. It also gives them a chance to put some purpose behind thinking around what their perceived challenge is and how they want to articulate that with you. And so you want to make sure that you understand you're not going to discuss anything else. And tell them that this is not going to be a time to commingle what performance issues are out there or what their other goals are about. It's all about them. And so let them know your goal for this meeting is to identify the transition challenge and work with them to create a plan to close that gap.
Perfect. What do you see as the greatest challenge to transition coaching?
I'd say making the time, remaining focused on that transition challenge during the discussion, and making sure they have the resources needed to overcome those challenges and prepare for the future success.
I would agree with you. I think time, and I think continuous focus. You might recall that a couple years ago, we worked with a client who had changed their business model. They moved from having multiple people call on different types of customers in their geography to a single person calling on different types of customers. We call this the ecosystem model. So an individual was calling on healthcare systems, was now calling also on regional payers and managed Medicaid. We had an individual who was calling on healthcare systems, was now calling on regional payers as well as a managed Medicaid. And we knew that there would be specific transition challenges. First, we had identified those in the risk sessions and had put mitigation strategies in place. But we knew that two big challenges were going to be, one, understanding the different types of customers and their needs, and also how some of those individuals, account managers, would need to transition their customers. Do you want to speak a little bit more about this, Loretta?
Yes, there were a variety of transition challenges that needed to be addressed quickly through multiple touch points, as I recall. The leader's role was to connect with each of their direct reports and together identify their greatest transition challenges based on all of the changes that they faced. And the important thing to remember was it was going to vary due to their previous experiences and backgrounds, as well as their appetite for the change.
So Loretta, we know that we provided through WLH a lot of support to this client during this transformation. And one of the best practices I think that we employed is we made sure to work with learning and development before the change happened. We think that it was very critical that we established early that partnership with learning and development.
You know, like we said, there were a lot of moving parts to this change, Wendy, and a lot of transition challenges in and of itself because of that. So L&D played what I consider a very pivotal role, providing just-in-time training so that they could quickly level set everyone with the knowledge and skills needed for both current success and future success within this new business model they designed. So my hat's off to everything they were able to pull it together and make it happen.
One identified transition challenge, right? Understanding new customers and their roles. The second was an external transition challenge for these account managers. And that was they were going to transition some of their customers because they had moved into this ecosystem model. Not only did we design the process, but the leaders were able to execute this with their account managers. We worked through the process where account managers from the old would introduce the new ones. And we knew that this could be a little complicated, but you had some concerns about this piece of the transition. You want to talk a little bit more about that, please?
Absolutely. You know, here's where I always worry about maintaining customer equity. To me, that's much more than just passing on the unwritten rules around approaching the account or key account insights. We wanted the leaders to make sure that they identified all the priority accounts that were within that geography and coordinate between the previous account manager and the new account manager, the opportunity for them to go in and have that introduction together. This goes a long way to establishing a new relationship, as you can imagine, but at the same time, that positive endorsement and that setting them up to win up front did more than just facilitate that new relationship. I think in many cases, it helped maintain that customer equity that's so critical.
Yeah, I think that we had several key learnings through this project. And one of them was to ensure that learning and development has enough lead time to support an effort such as a large-scale transformation, and that we had time to work with the leaders to hone their transition coaching skills. And we know that time and commitment was critical to the success of this transformation. So my final question for you, Loretta, is what specific recommendations do you have to help leaders successfully coach their direct reports through transition?
Well, if nothing else, be authentic. Be as true to yourself as you can be to your direct reports. Always seek to understand what your direct reports are feeling and thinking about the change throughout the transition. You don't have to agree with their perspective, but you do need to listen to understand it and avoid jumping to solutions or remaining focused just on performance. Leaders who are able to effectively model empathy during times of great change or difficult times like we're facing right now, are always able to create highly engaged individuals and teams, retain their top talent. And you and I both know, Wendy, that they dramatically shorten the transition time from 0 to 100.
Absolutely. We know that transition coaching is pivotal and that organizations really need to invest in the time to train their managers to effectively transition coach through the process. As we close out today's podcast, I'd like to recap a few key takeaways for leaders to coach their individuals, direct reports through transition. One is transition coaching is a specific type of coaching that helps individuals close gaps as a result of changes to their roles. 2, transition coaching works collaboratively between direct reports as well as their managers to get them from point A to point B. And transition coaching requires 100% commitment from both the manager and the direct report. Loretta, thank you so much for joining today's podcast and sharing your very valuable insights.
Oh, absolutely. It was definitely my pleasure. I appreciate being a part of it.
Yeah, and you are a leading expert on everything to do with leadership development. If you're leading an organizational change initiative and need support with the transition leadership or implementation support, feel free to reach out to WLH Consulting. If you are ready to commit to your change journey so you can thrive with your business, check out my new book, Change and Thrive, A Modern Approach to Change Leadership, now available on Amazon. I'd like to thank you again for tuning in and see you next week.